I still remember the way my heart used to race when his name lit up my phone. Back then, it felt like something rare was unfolding. The kind of connection that grows slowly but deeply, like roots spreading under the surface before you even realize how strong they've become. We met last year through mutual friends, and from our very first conversation there was this spark. He was charming in that natural, effortless way that made you lean in a little closer. He asked thoughtful questions, listened intently, remembered little details I'd mentioned in passing. It felt like he saw me, not just as a girl he was dating, but as a whole person with stories, dreams, and quirks worth knowing. Our first month together was everything I'd always hoped dating could be. He planned thoughtful dates, picnics in the park, late-night coffee runs, spontaneous drives with playlists we curated together. He texted me good morning before I was even awake, checked in during the day, and ended every night with a simple, sweet sleep well. It wasn't just the gestures, it was the consistency, the steady warmth that made me believe this was someone I could build something real with. And I wanted to believe it. I let myself soften around him in ways I hadn't with anyone in a long time. About a month into seeing each other, I felt ready. Ready to let the walls down a little more. Ready to share space, not just time. So one Friday night I invited him over. We cooked dinner together, danced clumsily in the kitchen to old R&B songs, and fell asleep tangled up in each other's arms. It felt intimate, natural, and right. But the next morning something subtle but unmistakable had shifted. It's hard to describe. Almost like a light had gone out behind his eyes. He was still there, technically, but emotionally, it felt like he had already left the room. Gone was the curious, attentive man who wanted to know every detail of my day. Instead, there was a strange, new version of him. Distant, slightly smug, and unsettlingly comfortable. Like he had crossed some invisible finish line and was now coasting. It started small. Over breakfast, instead of asking about my weekend plans or talking about the book I'd mentioned I was reading, he said almost teasingly, "You really like being in control, don't you? With your little apartment and your organized life." He smirked when he said it, and I laughed at first, thinking it was a harmless joke. But there was something in his tone, less playful, more patronizing, that didn't sit right. And once you notice a shift like that, you can't unsee it. Over the next few weeks, the changes only became more obvious. He stopped putting effort into planning dates. Instead, he'd text me last minute, expecting to come over and hang out, as if the days of effort and intention were now unnecessary. His messages grew shorter, less thoughtful. He didn't ask questions anymore. The conversations that once felt like deep dives now barely skimmed the surface. But it wasn't just the lack of effort. It was the way he started talking to me. He made subtle comments that chipped away at me piece by piece, like he was trying to pull me down from a pedestal he himself had built. "You're so independent." Almost too much, he'd say. Or, "You act like you don't need anyone. Why even date then?" It was confusing and hurtful. The same qualities he'd once admired. My ambition, my self-sufficiency, my sense of direction, now seemed to irritate him. I started questioning myself, wondering if I was too much, too strong, too something. But then one night, as I sat alone on my couch waiting for him to show up for a date he'd casually postponed twice, it hit me with a clarity I couldn't ignore. He was never showing me his real self. All that charm and effort in the beginning, it hadn't been genuine connection. It had been performance. A carefully curated version of himself designed to win me over. And once he felt he'd gotten me, once intimacy blurred the lines between us, he no longer felt the need to pretend. The mask slipped, and what was underneath wasn't someone who wanted to grow with me. It was someone who wanted to own me, someone who saw my love not as a shared experience, but as a trophy. The realization was painful, but also strangely liberating. I didn't confront him with a dramatic speech or a tearful fight. I just stopped participating in the performance. I stopped excusing the small cuts disguised as jokes. I stopped accepting the bare minimum as enough. And one afternoon, as we sat in silence on my couch, the kind of silence that's louder than words, I told him I was done. No anger, no accusations. Just the truth. This isn't what I want. I deserve more than this. He didn't argue. He didn't beg me to stay. He just shrugged, like it was inevitable. And maybe, in a way, it was. The night he walked out of my apartment, I expected to feel heartbroken. But what I felt was relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. Because somewhere along the line I had started shrinking to fit inside his version of what a relationship should look like. And ending it was like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. In the weeks that followed, I spent a lot of time thinking about the lesson he'd unknowingly taught me. It's easy to get swept up in how someone treats you before intimacy. The attention, the effort, the way they make you feel special. But the real truth about a person isn't revealed in the chase. It's revealed in what happens after. Do they continue to show up? Do they still want to know you, not just have you? Do they see you as a partner or a prize? I wish someone had told me sooner that love isn't about how hard someone tries to get you. It's about how consistently they choose to keep showing up once they do. And if you ever feel that sudden shift, that coldness, that complacency, that subtle erosion of respect, don't second-guess yourself. Trust your gut. You deserve a love that grows deeper, not lazier. One that makes you feel safe and valued, not conquered. And most importantly, one that never treats intimacy as an ending, but as a beginning. The weeks after I ended things were a strange mix of freedom and emptiness, like stepping out of a crowded room into fresh air, but still hearing the echoes of all the noise you left behind. At first, I questioned everything. Had I overreacted? Should I have tried harder, been more patient, given him another chance to prove himself? Those questions lingered in my head at night, when the apartment felt too quiet, and the bed felt too big. But every time I replayed the way his tone had changed, the way he'd spoken to me like I was something to be managed rather than cherished, I knew I'd done the right thing. It wasn't just that he'd stopped trying. It was that his respect for me had shifted, and once respect fades, the foundation of any relationship starts to crumble. And as painful as it was to admit, there was no rebuilding from that. About a week after the breakup, he texted me. The message was simple. "Hope you're doing okay." But reading it brought back a wave of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Part of me wanted to reply, to leave the door slightly open, maybe out of habit or loneliness. But then I remembered how he had made me feel in those final weeks. Like I was asking for too much when all I wanted was the same effort he'd once given freely. So I didn't respond. I let silence be my answer. That decision, small as it was, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd been losing. In the weeks that followed, I started noticing little things about myself again. Things I had unconsciously dimmed to make the relationship work. I started spending more time with friends I hadn't seen in months, filling my calendar with laughter and late-night conversations that reminded me who I was outside of us. I dove back into hobbies I'd let slide. Painting, reading, spontaneous weekend trips. And every brushstroke, every page, every mile reminded me that I was whole on my own. And slowly, the ache of losing him transformed into gratitude for the space his absence created. There was a night about a month later that I'll never forget. I was sitting on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand, watching the city lights flicker like constellations. My phone buzzed. Another message from him. This time it was longer. He said he missed me. He said he hadn't realized how much I did for him. How much he took for granted. He said he wanted to try again. For real this time. And for a brief moment my heart softened. But then I asked myself a question that cut through all the nostalgia and longing. Do I miss him? Or do I miss the version of him that never truly existed? And the answer was clear. I missed who I thought he was. The thoughtful, curious, gentle man from the beginning. But that version was a performance, and the reality was someone who saw intimacy as a finish line, not a starting point. So again, I didn't reply. Time has a way of revealing truths we ignore in the moment. And as the months passed, I realized that his behavior wasn't about me being unworthy or unlovable. It was about him. Some people treat relationships like games with levels to beat and prizes to win. Once they feel they've won, the effort ends. But love isn't a conquest. It's a choice. One you make every single day, even when the thrill fades, even when things become routine. And when someone stops choosing you, the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself. I started dating again eventually, but I approached it differently. I paid attention not just to the words people said before intimacy, but to the actions they took after it. I watched for consistency. Not grand gestures, but small, steady ones. The follow-up text, the continued curiosity, the willingness to make effort even after closeness. And when I found someone who did those things without being asked, someone who didn't treat intimacy like an ending, but as a deeper invitation to know me, I realized just how much I'd grown. And here's the thing I wish I could tell anyone reading this who's felt that same shift after sleeping with someone. It's not your fault. It's not because you gave in too soon or because you did something wrong. It's because some people see intimacy as a transaction, something to achieve rather than share. And when that happens, it says everything about them and nothing about you. The real test of love isn't how someone treats you when they're trying to win you over. It's how they treat you when they already have. Looking back now, I don't regret a single part of that relationship. Not even the hurt. It taught me one of the most important lessons of my life, that I deserve a love that shows up after, one that stays curious, one that keeps trying, one that doesn't stop building once the walls come down. And until I find that, or rather, until I build that with someone, I'd rather be alone, whole and unshrunk, than loved by someone who only wanted to win. Months turned into seasons, and with each one I felt more grounded in who I was and what I wanted. At first I thought healing would come like a wave, quick, powerful, and cleansing. But instead, it was more like the tide, subtle, patient, washing over me again and again, until the sharp edges of what I'd been through softened into something that no longer hurt to touch. There were moments when I'd catch myself thinking about him, not because I missed him, but because I finally understood him. He wasn't evil. He wasn't heartless. He just didn't know how to love in a way that wasn't self-serving. And the truth is, many people don't. They chase the spark, the thrill, the validation of being wanted, but they never learn how to stay once the fireworks fade. They mistake possession for partnership. They want the idea of love, not the responsibility of it. Once I recognized that, the bitterness I felt toward him melted into something closer to indifference. Maybe even compassion. Because in the end, he didn't ruin anything. He just revealed himself. And that revelation gave me the clarity to stop settling for less than I deserved. One evening, about 6 months later, I ran into him unexpectedly. I was out with friends at a little rooftop bar, laughing over overpriced cocktails, when I turned around and there he was, standing near the entrance, talking to someone. For a second, my chest tightened. It's strange how the body remembers things even when the heart has moved on. He spotted me and walked over, and I braced myself for the awkward small talk. But what surprised me was how small he felt to me now. He smiled, asked how I'd been, and I answered politely but without effort. The conversation was easy, too easy. Like talking to someone I'd once known in a different lifetime. At one point he said, "You look really happy." And I realized he was right. I was happy, not because I had someone new or because I'd moved on in the cliché sense, but because I had rebuilt my life around things that made me feel whole. Friends, passions, peace. I didn't need his validation anymore. I didn't crave his attention. I didn't even feel anger. Just closure. When he left that night, I didn't replay the interaction in my head. I didn't wonder if he'd text me. I just turned back to my friends and picked up right where I left off. That's when I knew, deep down, I was truly free. In the months that followed, dating became something different. Not a desperate search for connection, but a quiet exploration of possibility. I approached each new person I met with curiosity but also caution. I didn't rush intimacy. I didn't mistake attention for intention. I watched what people did when the newness wore off. How they treated me when there was nothing left to win. And when someone started showing signs of the same pattern, pulling away after closeness, acting like effort was optional, I didn't try to fix it. I didn't twist myself into knots to make it work. I simply walked away, because I had finally learned that walking away isn't losing. It's choosing yourself. And then, almost when I least expected it, I met someone different. It wasn't a whirlwind this time. It was a slow burn. He didn't flood my phone with texts or try to sweep me off my feet with grand gestures. Instead, he showed up, consistently, kindly, genuinely. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He made plans and kept them. And when the moment came when intimacy entered the picture, nothing changed. There was no shift, no mask slipping, no sudden arrogance or withdrawal. The next morning he brewed coffee and asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market. That tiny gesture, so ordinary, so gentle, nearly brought me to tears. Because for the first time, I realized that love wasn't supposed to feel like a finish line. It was supposed to feel like a doorway. The contrast was staggering. The man I'd dated before had made me feel like I needed to prove my worth to keep his interest. But this man, he made me feel like I didn't have to do anything except be myself. There was no performance, no pressure, no silent competition for power. Just two people showing up for each other day after day, even when it was inconvenient, even when the excitement faded into routine. And that's when I understood something I wish I'd known all along. Real love isn't about the chase. It's about the choosing, over and over again, long after the chase is over. Looking back, I'm grateful for the heartbreak that once felt unbearable. Because without it, I might never have learned to trust myself. I might never have learned that my boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were gates to let the right people in. I might never have learned that love should never feel like a prize I have to earn. It should feel like a partnership I'm building. And I might never have found the strength to walk away the moment someone treated my heart like a checkbox on their list. Now, when I talk to friends who are going through similar things, I tell them the same thing I wish someone had told me. Pay attention to what happens after. Before intimacy, anyone can be charming, attentive, even perfect. But the version of them that shows up after, that's who they really are. And if that version doesn't honor you, cherish you, or keep choosing you, walk away. Don't waste time trying to convince someone to value what they already should. Love isn't a game. It's a choice. And the right person will never stop choosing you. Not before, not after, not ever. It's funny how the deepest lessons of our lives often come disguised as heartbreak, and how the people who once felt like our entire world end up becoming chapters that simply guided us to where we were always meant to be. As more time passed, that relationship, the one that had once consumed so much of my thoughts, began to feel distant, like a story I'd read long ago. But its lessons stayed with me, woven into everything I did. I stopped apologizing for my standards. I stopped doubting my worth when someone couldn't meet them. I stopped believing that I needed to shrink myself to be loved. Because now, I understood that love built on pretense and performance would never last. And I was done mistaking breadcrumbs for a feast. One night, nearly a year after we'd broken up, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. I was curled up on my couch, a cup of tea warming my hands, my dog asleep at my feet, and my phone lighting up with a text from the man I was now with. The one who showed up, who didn't flinch at vulnerability, who didn't disappear when things got real. "Made dinner," his message read. Come over when you're done reading. Simple, thoughtful, steady. And it hit me then, the ease, the peace, the trust, was what love was supposed to feel like. It wasn't fireworks or dizzying highs followed by sudden drops. It was safety. It was knowing that even after intimacy, effort didn't fade. It deepened. It was being seen, not as a conquest, but as a companion. I used to think closure meant hearing an apology from the person who hurt you, or getting answers to all the questions that kept you up at night. But now I know closure is quieter. It's not about them. It's about you. It's the moment you realize you're no longer waiting for an explanation, because you've already written one for yourself. It's the moment you understand that you didn't lose anything by walking away. You protected something precious. Your peace, your self-respect, your capacity to love fully. And it's the moment you see that everything that felt like an ending was actually a beginning. Sometime after midnight, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched his name on social media. The man who once made me doubt my worth. His profile popped up, full of pictures with new people, new places. The same charming smile he'd once shown me. But instead of bitterness, I felt a strange sense of gratitude. Because in that smile, I didn't see the one that got away. I saw a man who had taught me boundaries, who had shown me the cost of settling, who had unintentionally prepared me for the love I was now ready to receive. And maybe he'd changed, or maybe he hadn't. But it didn't matter anymore. That story was no longer mine to carry. The next evening, I found myself sitting across the table from someone who was part of my story now. The man who had gently, patiently shown me what consistency looked like. We talked about everything and nothing, laughed over shared jokes, and planned a future that felt steady instead of uncertain. And at one point, as he reached across the table and took my hand, I thought about the girl I had been a year ago, the one who mistook charm for character and validation for love. I wished I could reach back in time and tell her that love isn't supposed to make you question your worth. It's supposed to remind you of it. The biggest transformation, though, wasn't just in how I saw relationships. It was in how I saw myself. I no longer feared being alone, because I had learned that solitude isn't a punishment. It's a sanctuary. It's where you remember who you are, where you rebuild the pieces of yourself someone else tried to dull. And once you know how to love yourself fully, you stop tolerating anyone who loves you halfway. That shift, from seeking validation to embodying self-worth, was the most empowering thing I'd ever experienced. Now, whenever I share my story with friends, online, or with someone going through something similar, I always end with this. Pay attention not just to the version of someone you meet in the beginning, but to the one who shows up when the masks fall away. The real story of a relationship doesn't start with the first kiss, or the first night you spend together. It starts the day after. It starts with how they speak to you once they feel secure, how they prioritize you once the chase is over, how they love you when there's nothing left to win. And if that version of them doesn't feel like love, if it feels like arrogance, withdrawal, or complacency, don't be afraid to walk away, because love that disappears after intimacy was never love at all. And the love that remains, that stays curious, steady, and kind, that's the love worth waiting for. That's the love worth building. That's the love you deserve. A few months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I woke up earlier than usual and lay there for a moment, watching the light spill softly through the curtains. It was one of those peaceful mornings where everything felt still. No rush, no chaos, no heavy thoughts crowding my mind. My phone buzzed gently on the nightstand, and there it was, a good morning text from the man who had slowly become my safe place. "Coffee or pancakes?" it read. I smiled. Not because of the words themselves, but because of what they meant. That he was thinking of me, that he wanted to share even the smallest, most ordinary parts of his day. And in that moment, I realized how deeply my definition of love had changed. It wasn't about big gestures anymore. It wasn't about being swept off my feet. It was about showing up over and over again in the tiny, consistent ways that build trust and tenderness. Later that day, as we walked hand in hand through a quiet farmer's market, I found myself reflecting on the path that had led me here. If you had told me a year ago that I would look back on that painful breakup with gratitude, I would have laughed. But now, I understood that heartbreak had been my greatest teacher. It taught me to stop confusing effort with intention, attraction with compatibility, attention with respect. It taught me that intimacy is not a finish line but a beginning, and that anyone who treats it otherwise is showing you exactly who they are. Most of all, it taught me the value of patience. Patience with myself as I healed, patience with love as it found its way back to me, and patience with the journey of becoming someone who would never again settle for less. There was a time when I equated love with intensity, with butterflies and late-night texts and dramatic gestures. But now I knew that true love often felt more like calm. It was knowing that if I needed someone, they'd be there without me having to ask. It was feeling safe enough to be vulnerable without fearing that my honesty would be used against me. It was waking up next to someone and knowing that their presence wasn't a reward I had to earn, but a choice they continued to make. That shift, from craving intensity to craving peace, was the biggest sign of how much I'd grown. One evening we were sitting on the couch, a movie playing in the background, when he turned to me and asked a simple question. "Do you ever think about him? The one before me?" For a moment I thought about lying, brushing it off, saying I never did. But the truth was, sometimes I did. Not because I missed him, but because that experience was part of my story. The messy, complicated chapter that taught me what I needed to learn. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not in the way you think. I don't miss him. I just sometimes think about how far I've come since then." He nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. "I'm glad he's part of your story," he said, "because without him, maybe you and I wouldn't be sitting here." It struck me then how healing it was to be with someone who wasn't threatened by my past, but grateful for it. Someone who saw the scars not as baggage, but as proof that I'd survived, learned and chosen to love again. And in that moment, I silently thanked the version of me who had walked away from the man who saw intimacy as a finish line. Because if she hadn't been brave enough to leave, I might still be stuck in a cycle of shrinking myself to keep someone else comfortable. We often talk about heartbreak like it's an ending. But now I know it's really a beginning. It's the universe's way of clearing out what's not meant for you to make space for what is. It's how you learn to draw boundaries, to demand more, to expect better. And when love finally arrives, real love, the kind that stays, you appreciate it in a way you never could have before. You stop questioning whether you're enough. You stop chasing people who make you feel like too much. You stop accepting crumbs when you deserve a feast. That night, as we sat in the quiet glow of the television, his hand still holding mine, I realized that the love I had now wasn't a prize or a victory. It was a partnership. It wasn't about who won or who got the other. It was about choosing each other, again and again, even on the hard days, even after the spark of newness faded. And as I leaned my head against his shoulder, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from pretending everything is fine, but the deep, steady peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be. And maybe that's the real lesson at the heart of my story, that sometimes the person who hurts you isn't a mistake. They're a mirror, showing you where you still need to heal, what you still need to learn, and how deeply you deserve to be loved. And when the right person finally arrives, they won't need you to perform, or prove, or shrink. They'll simply meet you where you are, and love you there. There's a special kind of peace that comes when you finally stop questioning your worth, A peace that settles deep into your bones and quietly changes the way you love, the way you show up, and the way you let others show up for you. Months after that chapter of my life had closed, I found myself thinking about how much I had changed. Not just in relationships, but in every corner of my life. I had become more intentional about the people I surrounded myself with. I had learned to say no without guilt, to walk away from things that didn't serve me, and to build a life so full on its own that anyone who joined it had to add to it, not complete it. That was the version of me that heartbreak had carved out. Stronger, wiser, and no longer afraid of being alone. I remember one particular afternoon, sitting at a small cafe, where I'd often gone during those difficult weeks after the breakup. Back then, I would sit by the window, staring at couples walking by, wondering why it was so easy for them and so complicated for me. But now, months later, I was sitting in the same spot. Except this time, I wasn't wondering anymore. I was writing. A journal sat open in front of me, filled with reflections and lessons I'd learned, not just about love, but about myself. And as I wrote, I realized something powerful. The relationship hadn't failed. It had served its purpose. It had shown me what I would no longer accept. It had taught me the difference between being wanted and being valued. It had reminded me that the version of myself I'd tried to shrink was, in fact, the most lovable part of me. I used to think healing was about erasing the past, about forgetting, moving on, pretending like none of it ever happened. But I've learned that healing is about integrating the past. It's about carrying those lessons forward without carrying the pain. It's about looking back not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Because every heartbreak, every betrayal, every disappointment has shaped me into the woman I am now. Someone who doesn't settle for half love. Someone who doesn't chase what walks away. Someone who chooses herself even when it's hard. And that strength showed up in ways I didn't expect. It showed up in the way I set boundaries at work, no longer overextending myself to prove my worth. It showed up in the way I nurtured my friendships, choosing depth over quantity. It showed up in the way I spoke to myself, kinder, more patient, more forgiving, and most of all, it showed up in the way I loved. I no longer needed grand gestures or constant reassurance. I no longer mistook inconsistency for passion. I no longer ignored red flags in the name of potential. I wanted something steady, something safe, something real. And now I knew I deserved exactly that. One evening, as my partner and I were cleaning up after dinner, he looked at me and said, "You know, I feel lucky that we met when we did." I asked him why, and he smiled. "Because I think we both needed to learn a lot before we were ready for this." And he was right. If we had met a year earlier, I might have doubted his love. I might have sabotaged something good because I didn't believe I deserved it. I might have clung to old fears and patterns. But now, I was ready. Not because someone else had healed me, but because I had healed myself. And that's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't just change the way you see love. It changes the way you receive it. Later that night, as we lay in bed, he wrapped his arm around me and whispered, "I hope you know I'm never going to stop showing up." And I believed him. Not because of the words, but because of the actions that had followed them every single day. And as I closed my eyes, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who thought intimacy was a test she had to pass. The one who confused attention with affection. The one who stayed too long, hoping someone would change. I wished I could reach back and tell her, "One day you'll look back and realize that everything you lost was leading you here." And so here I am, not defined by the person who stopped trying after he got what he wanted, but shaped by the choice I made to walk away. Not haunted by what went wrong, but grateful for what it taught me. And most importantly, not waiting for someone to make me whole, because I already am. Love now is just the beautiful bonus. It's the hand that fits perfectly into mine. It's the voice that says, "I'm not going anywhere." It's the calm after the storm. And it's the reminder that the best love stories don't start with fireworks. They start when you choose yourself, and never stop. The seasons kept changing, and with each passing one, the distance between who I used to be and who I had become grew wider. Not in a sad way, but in the most beautiful way imaginable. I started noticing the subtleties of my own growth in everyday moments. The way I no longer flinched at small disappointments. The way my peace wasn't so easily shaken. The way I could sit in silence and feel content rather than restless. I was no longer searching for someone to complete me. I was sharing my completeness with someone who had earned a place in my life. And that shift, from seeking to sharing, was the quiet proof that I had healed. There was one evening in particular that felt like the full circle moment I didn't even know I needed. We were on a weekend trip to the mountains, tucked away in a small cabin surrounded by pine trees and the smell of rain-soaked earth. It was late. The sky outside was deep blue, and the fireplace crackled softly in the corner. I was sitting on the floor with a blanket wrapped around me, flipping through an old journal I had brought along. It was the one I'd written in during the breakup. Page after page of heartbreak, self-doubt, anger, and confusion. As I read those words, I barely recognized the version of myself who had written them. She had been so desperate to be chosen, so willing to compromise her worth, just to keep someone from leaving. And yet I felt nothing but love for her, because she had walked through the fire, and that's why I was standing here now. He came and sat beside me, gently pulling the journal from my hands. "Is that yours?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "It's from a long time ago," I said softly. "From a version of me who didn't know what she deserved." He smiled and kissed my forehead. "I'm glad she kept going." And in that simple sentence, I heard everything I needed to hear. Not pity, not judgment, just pride. Because that girl had kept going. She had cried, doubted, and stumbled. But she had never stopped moving forward. And now she was me, stronger, wiser, and deeply loved. Later that night, as we stood outside under a blanket of stars, he slipped his hand into mine and said, "I hope you know I'll never stop trying. Not because I have to, but because I want to." My heart swelled, not just because of his words, but because I finally understood what they meant. Love wasn't supposed to be about someone chasing you endlessly to prove their worth. It was about two people choosing, every day, to meet each other halfway. It was about effort. Steady, quiet, unwavering effort that didn't disappear once the newness faded. As I looked up at the night sky, I thought about the man who had once stopped trying after intimacy. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no sadness, just gratitude. Gratitude that he had shown me what love wasn't so I could recognize what love is. Gratitude that his indifference had pushed me to find my strength. Gratitude that losing him had led me to myself, and eventually to someone who saw my worth from the start and never needed convincing. I realized then that closure isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you give yourself. It's not the apology you might never receive, or the explanation that might never come. It's the deep, unshakable knowing that you are better off now. It's the quiet peace of knowing you walked away not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. And so, under that star-filled sky, with someone's fingers intertwined with mine, and a heart that felt whole and unburdened, I smiled. Not just because I had found love again, but because I had found me. And maybe that was the point all along. Every heartbreak, every ending, every tear, they weren't detours. They were the path. The long, winding, necessary path that led me home to myself. And from that place of wholeness, I finally built something that wasn't based on proving my value or earning someone's effort. It was built on trust, mutual respect, and a love that showed up, not just before intimacy, but long after. And in that moment, I knew this was no longer a story about how someone changed after we slept together. It was a story about how I changed, how I learned, healed, and grew. And how that growth brought me to a love that wasn't about finishing lines or proving points. It was about beginnings, and the beautiful, steady life we were building together, one small, intentional choice at a time. The final chapter of this journey didn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic realizations. It arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, like the first light of dawn seeping into a dark room. Life had settled into something steady and beautiful, a rhythm that no longer felt like I was chasing or proving anything. I had built a life that was full and whole on its own, and the love that now existed in it was the kind that added depth and joy, not the kind that patched up wounds or filled empty spaces. And yet, even in this piece, there were moments that reminded me just how far I had come. One of those moments happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was cleaning out my closet, something I'd been meaning to do for months, and tucked in the back of a drawer, I found an old photograph. It was a picture of me and him, the man who had stopped trying after intimacy. We were smiling in the photo, frozen in a moment that once felt real. For a second, I just stared at it. The woman in that photo looked so hopeful, so eager to be loved, so willing to overlook the red flags just to keep believing in a version of love that wasn't meant for her. And instead of anger or sadness, I felt compassion. Deep, genuine compassion for that version of me. She had no idea how strong she was going to become. She had no idea how many boundaries she'd learned to set, how fiercely she would protect her peace, how unapologetically she would walk away from anything that didn't serve her. She didn't know that she would go from questioning if she was enough to knowing, without a doubt, that she always was. I slipped the photo back into the drawer, not out of nostalgia, but out of gratitude. That chapter was part of my story. Not the whole story, not the defining story, but a chapter that led me here. And here was beautiful. Here was waking up next to someone whose love didn't fluctuate based on how much he got. Here was feeling seen on my worst days, not just admired on my best ones. Here was never questioning if I was too much, because I was always met with, "You're exactly enough." Later that evening, as we cooked dinner together, laughing, spilling sauce, dancing to music in the kitchen, he paused, looked at me, and said something simple but powerful. "You make loving you easy." And that sentence hit me harder than I expected, because for so long I had believed that I was difficult to love, that I needed to tone myself down, earn affection, or prove my worth. But now I understood that I had never been difficult. I had just been loving the wrong people. The right love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't punish you for your strength. It celebrates you for exactly who you are. And as the months turned into years, that love only grew stronger. There were still challenges, of course. Disagreements, stressful days, moments where life felt heavy. But the difference was he never stopped showing up. He never stopped trying. And neither did I. Because that's what real love is. Not a sprint to a finish line, but a daily choice to walk beside each other, even when the path gets rough. Looking back now, I don't see that painful chapter as a mistake. I see it as a turning point. The moment I stopped settling and started demanding the kind of love that aligned with who I truly was. It was the spark that ignited my journey back to myself, the lesson that taught me the value of walking away, and the reason I now stand where I am, loved deeply, respected completely, and valued endlessly. So if there's one thing I could say to anyone who's felt that painful shift after intimacy, that coldness, that withdrawal, that sudden drop in effort, it's this: don't chase it. Don't try to fix it. Don't shrink yourself to hold on to someone who was never truly holding you. Because one day you'll look back and realize that losing them wasn't a loss at all. It was the beginning of everything you were meant to have. It was the moment you chose you. And that choice will lead you somewhere far more beautiful than anything you left behind. And maybe, just maybe, that's what love is supposed to be. Not a reward someone gives you after you've earned it. Not a performance you have to keep up to deserve it, but a partnership, steady, equal, and unconditional. One where intimacy isn't the end of the story, but just the prologue to something far more meaningful. One where being loved feels less like being won and more like being seen. And once you find that, you'll understand why everything before it had to fall apart. So something real could finally take its place. And then one day, without even realizing it, the story that had once been filled with pain, confusion, and doubt became nothing more than a distant memory. A lesson etched into my heart, but no longer dictating how I lived or loved. Life had moved forward, and so had I. The apartment that once echoed with the loneliness of heartbreak was now filled with warmth. The sound of laughter bouncing off the walls, the smell of dinner cooking while music played softly in the background, the comforting weight of a hand reaching for mine without hesitation. Everything felt different now. Not because life was suddenly perfect, but because I had built it on a foundation of truth, self-respect, and lessons learned the hard way. There are still moments, fleeting, quiet moments, when I think about the girl I was back then. The one who mistook charm for commitment, who ignored the tiny shifts in energy because she so desperately wanted things to work. And when I think of her, I don't feel embarrassed or ashamed anymore. I feel proud, because she was brave enough to hope, brave enough to try, brave enough to walk away when trying became too costly to her soul. She was the version of me who started the journey, and I am the version of her who finished it. Now, when friends come to me with stories that sound painfully familiar, about partners who change after intimacy, about people who stop showing up once they get what they wanted, I don't give them advice in cliches. I tell them the truth, that it's not their fault, that they're not too much or too demanding for wanting consistency, that real love does not evaporate the moment it's no longer a chase, that if someone stops trying once they feel secure, they were never truly in it to begin with. And I tell them something else too, something I wish someone had told me, that walking away isn't a failure. It's self-respect in motion. It's choosing peace over potential. It's proof that you're done auditioning for roles you were born to play. The most beautiful part of all of this is that now, love feels simple. Not boring, not predictable. Just simple in the way it should. It's waking up and knowing you're loved without needing to earn it. It's having disagreements but never doubting the commitment beneath them. It's building a future together not because you need each other to survive, but because you choose each other to thrive. It's the quiet certainty that this steady, unwavering, deeply rooted connection is what love was always supposed to feel like. Sometimes late at night, I lie awake with my head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and I think about how far I've come. I think about the girl who once cried herself to sleep, wondering why she wasn't enough, and I wish I could whisper to her, one day, you'll smile without wondering if someone is going to take that happiness away. One day you'll be loved in a way that feels effortless. One day, you'll stop doubting your worth because someone will see it so clearly that you'll never forget it again. And that's the beauty of healing. It doesn't erase the scars. It transforms them into reminders. Reminders of what you've overcome. Reminders of how much you've grown. Reminders that even the most painful endings can lead to the most extraordinary beginnings. Because the truth is, I'm no longer grateful despite the heartbreak. I'm grateful because of it. It was the catalyst for everything good that came after. It was the reason I learned to choose myself. It was the lesson that taught me how to demand the kind of love I deserve. So now, when I look back on that relationship, the one that fell apart the moment intimacy began, I don't see a tragedy. I see a turning point. The moment I stopped mistaking effort for love. The moment I realized that someone's willingness to keep choosing me mattered more than their desire to win me. The moment I decided that I would never again accept a version of love that asked me to shrink. This is my story. Not a story of being conquered, but of reclaiming myself. Not a story of loss, but of rediscovery. And if I could leave one final thought with anyone who's standing where I once stood, it would be this. The right person won't disappear after they get close. They'll lean in closer. They'll keep showing up. They'll build something real with you. And when that happens, you'll understand. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every tear was simply preparing you for a love that never asks you to question if you're enough. Because with the right person, you won't just feel enough. You'll know you always were. It was a quiet Sunday evening. The kind that doesn't need anything special to feel perfect. The sun was melting into shades of gold and rose outside our window. The smell of dinner lingered softly in the air, and a playlist hummed quietly in the background. Nothing dramatic, just peace. I was sitting on the balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands, when he came out and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders before sitting beside me. For a few moments, we didn't say anything. We just watched the sky change colors, the silence between us full and comforting. Then he reached over, laced his fingers through mine and said, "I don't ever want you to forget that I choose you. Every day, in every version of life." I turned to look at him, and in his eyes I didn't see the excitement of a chase or the pride of a conquest. I saw partnership, patience, and the promise of something that would last. And in that moment I realized this was the ending I had always deserved. Not the one filled with questions and disappointments, but one built on trust, choice, and a love that stayed long after the spark. I smiled, leaned my head on his shoulder, and whispered back, "And I choose me too." Because that was the real victory, not just finding someone who stayed, but becoming someone who never settled for less again. And with that, my story wasn't just ending. It was finally beginning.